You've made it back safely. I watched everything. Don't worry. I've dug up this small, speedy spaceship for you. By pressing the directional button and the jump button, the boosters enable the spaceship to warp through space. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Gunstar Heroes. In the last part, we took care of the last of the main stages and went through the Gauntlet, and now we're in a Gradius stage. This stage is interesting because, as the professor said, you can dash in any direction with the jump button at any point in time, which I believe for me is set to B. But what's really interesting about this stage is how they handle it in two-player. Because there's only one spaceship in two-player, but the second player controls that little red dot you can see on the side of the spaceship, the turret. And it fires their weapon out of it. And especially if you get the lightsaber weapon combo, fire and lightning, you can use that to basically erase like 80% of enemy projectiles in this stage, making this stage a complete non-issue. With that said, this stage definitely can be on the slow side because being a Gradius-like shoot-'em-up, you don't really control the pace at which this stage goes. The game does. But you do have this mini-boss here. This is Timeron. This boss fight actually shows up in Black's Dice Maze. And the way it works there is you shoot at it while it's shooting at you, but then it reverses time and makes all of its projectiles move in reverse. But here, if you last 100 minutes in-game, you get a gigantic score bonus. It's basically, it turns into a Toho, it turns into a Bullet Hell, a Don Maku, whatever you like to call it. And because of that boss fight can be either very short, or as long as that 100 in-game minutes is. I forget exactly how long that is IRL. In fact, you know what? Let me see if I can just YouTube that real quick to see what the record is on that. Timer on Gunstar. Oh boy. So, about that, 100 in-game minutes is about an hour and a half. So maybe don't do that unless you're trying to do it specifically. I can definitely see, I think I've talked about them like once or twice. Retro achievements, that like emulator-based achievement system for retro games. I can totally see them having an achievement for that. In this, in fact, you know what, let me actually go check that. Retro achievements, Gunstar. Let's see. Lasts for 10 minutes against Timeron. Looks like that's all they got. Oh, you know, that's fair, that's fair. Despite being very Kirby in the game, though, this stage isn't too hard overall. The hardest section is actually probably coming up right here, barring maybe the boss fight stuff, where you just gotta dodge a lot of meteors, and I guess they're technically comets. Asteroids. That's the word. Rocks, either way, and sometimes the speeds they move at, especially if you accidentally knock them some other direction, might be a little unpredictable, and you can take some pretty heavy damage here. Thankfully, in multiplayer, this stage is actually a little easier overall, even outside of the whole other player can take care of projectiles thing. As I think only the person controlling the ship has a health bar. At least I think that's the case. So you don't need to really worry about even tanking hits and splitting up who gets what health pickups. And never forget that you have that boost. It's kind of situational, but it can help you get out of some tight spots, because I forget if touching anything in the midst of the warp will actively damage you or not. I want to say it doesn't, but I guess be careful. Now, this game's got some interesting stuff behind the scenes in that, like, cutting room floor-wise, there's not a lot in the final game that's not really used, like, the credits music's a little longer and stuff. But we actively do have a prototype out there of the game, and there's a lot of differences. There's the obvious graphical stuff that's a little different here and there. But easily the most shocking thing to me is damage value differences. Every weapon did much more damage in the prototype, and bosses had a lot less health. So this was a game that they actively made harder, probably realizing either it wouldn't be as fun without that difficulty, or that it could be the usual, people will play this for like 5 minutes and beat the game or some shit kind of thing. The usual rental store kind of deal. Although now that I think about it, I've never actively researched what, like, rental culture was like at the time in Japan. Because obviously that was a big deal here, impacting many games, even looking especially at Ninja Gaiden 3. But I'm not sure what the exact equivalence was at the era for Japan. That might be an interesting research topic to look into at some point if I'm ever bored at 3 AM, which I often am. It is kind of funny seeing this, though, and just looking at what Treasure would make down the line. Because, yeah, while I love things like this and Alien Soldier, I would say overall Treasure is definitely most well known for their shoot-'em-ups. Be it Gradius 5, Ikaruga, Radiant Silvergun, those are all, like, considered some of the peak of their genre. And you can see the origins here, more or less. I want to say maybe when they were at, Konami, some of the devs even worked on Gradius 3, probably. Which is probably my favorite Gradius overall. Not that there's a whole lot of mechanical differences between Gradius games, besides maybe Gradius 5. With that, though, we're coming up on the boss fight for this stage, or at least the first major boss fight, despite those 2 or 3 mini-bosses earlier in. It's our good old friend Seven Force once again. But it's a lot easier this time, because it's only one phase, it's just that every form is now in attack. For instance, Urchin fires off lasers in various directions. Crab Force will follow you. Eagle Force follows you while throwing projectiles at you. Tail Force spins across either the top or the bottom of the screen. Soldier, I think, can fire some stuff at you. And Tiger, I think, just rushes directly at you. And I want to say it can turn into Blaster. It's just like the rarest one in my experience. I think it's just firing a couple of shots at you. It is a much easier fight overall than the Seven Force fight that we did the last part. If only because you have a lot more room to work with. Mind you, that can also heavily depend on your weapon choice. Like, I can just stay far away, not have a thing to worry about, but if I had, say, like, the lightsaber weapon or something, I'd be a little more out of luck. In fact, I was actually kind of laughing looking at the retro achievements thing a second ago. One of the achievements for this is to beat the game with only the basic flamethrower, and that's terrifying. I would never, I could never. If only for the final boss being a nightmare. But Seven Force isn't the end of the stage. After this brief little rush, we're gonna have to fight, I think it's the core of the arc? And it's honestly still kind of an easy fight, but it's still a boss fight, so you need to be careful. And based off the background, hey, welcome to the moon. It's not the first time I've been here plenty of times. In fact, I know this is extremely outdated for me to say, but hey, happy birthday, Endwalker. I believe that particular last bird, if you hit it a lot of times, you can get a lot more health out of it than the other ones, so, hey, take advantage of that if you can. Alright, so we're fighting the guard system of the thing now, and this is a bit of an interesting fight in that it's 3 phases, but it's all one boss still. But each phase is basically one attack. Like this, I believe, is the unit of hammer, which can fire down a couple of lasers. It can spin at you, and then it can hammer itself down. Or is this the dragon? I can never remember which is which, but all I know is the weird mechs being fired out look like the tops of Gundam heads. If they were, for some reason, also stereo systems. They can be a lot more annoying in the case that you don't have anything that has a chaser equipped to it, but in my case, I don't have to worry about that. Though this is also a fight where I'd say using free shot's a lot easier than using fixed shot, because if you're leaving yourself too open by standing in one place for too long, things that like to slam down like this can be troublesome fights. I do appreciate at least that the game does a good enough job at making sure there's situations where fixed shot is better and free shot's better. So there's always going to be difficulty and curves. There's going to be peaks and valleys, rather, no matter what you do, in a way that like feels organic. I want to say these things can hurt you, so make sure you're just trying your best to avoid them by doing like the belly flop. But now we're on to phase 2. No, this is the dragon. This is like the Eeler dragon. It's just gonna swirl all over the place and try to hit you in a couple different ways. This is probably overall the hardest section to hit if you're on certain weapons, if only because it's so high in the sky. But it's also the easiest to dodge because all it really does for an attack is this fireball attack, and sometimes it'll swing a little lower. With that said, that background is definitely a little flashy. Oh, I just realized I have to go re-render the first two parts because I didn't put that flashing lights warning in. Well, I'll do that after this. I got stuff to do today. Now we're on to the third attack system phase. This is the Human Core, which I love this song here. This is probably the hardest phase overall because I think it not only has the most health, it's also proactive at attacking even if the attack itself is easy to dodge. It'll spin its arm around, and I believe the spin itself can hurt you if you're close enough to it when it's towards the foreground here. But when it's done spinning its arm, it throws out an energy orb. It can either go along the ground or upwards at an angle. I believe it tries to alternate between the two, but depending on where it is on the screen, dodging might be a bit of a problem. So be careful. And maybe don't actively jump into the projectile. That's never a good look. I guess at the end of the day, this fight's meant to sort of be a resource drainer because you already went through a long enough shoot 'em up stage and now you got 3 boss fights in a row to do, essentially. But I don't find anything to be too bad. If anything, the biggest annoyance on multiplayer here, from memory from when I tried to do this with Scott some years back, was he was always trying to be closer to the boss to begin with because I think he had some closer range weapons, but he was also in fixed shot. And being on the right side of this screen with this boss fight is just generally a bad idea. But that's that stage all done. Hell yeah. But now we're on to the final stage, which is, definitely the hardest stage overall. If only for the fact of it's a boss rush. But not your normal boss rush like a Mega Man game. They're gonna throw all the main guys at us again. But they all have new patterns, and it's real bad. And there's not many restock points between. But first we gotta fight off Pink's good old henchman. Just sit here in the corner and it'll basically never be able to touch you. Slide under it when it tries to do the charge, and otherwise just hold that attack button if you got a chaser weapon at least. I believe, by the way, in the Japanese version and the prototype, this boss's name is misspelled. It's the Duck Battalion, but I think it's the Batleon in that other text, which I miss the eras when typos like that were common. They always had a bit of a charm to them. This guy R6 might not make sense out of context, but it's always been charming. But they're not done yet. Now he's got a machine gun, and same strategy wins. You can duck beneath most of his attacks, and you can take advantage of invincibility frames here by just stun locking them in the corner. Occasionally I'll try to do the little jump up, but you can just kind of ignore a lot of that, honestly. Honestly, the invincibility frames that bosses get is probably going to be the part that hurts you the most in this stage, because you might have them in a good lock, and then they just say, no, you don't want to do too much damage in a row. But I am glad that not every boss in the game has these. It's really only the human bosses that do. And most of those are in this stage, now that I think about it. But I really like this stage, barring the mechanics of it, because I like how you can literally see everyone watching you. It's sort of like that one screen in Pulseman, where you can see the doctor watching Pulseman go through the area. And whenever a boss is about to come up on their refight, they leave the screen. That's really cool. You want to be careful between some of the boss fights, though, because you'll have sections like this where you can just hear a ding off in the distance, and that's because a projectile's been fired at you, and you're either going to need to jump over it, hide in one of the little divots here, which are not instant kill, thankfully, or hang beneath one of the single tile pipes. And the way to do that's pretty straightforward. You just press down and the jump button. It's like falling through a platform in certain Mega Man games, namely the Zero NT Creates games. Time for our refight against Pinky. This fight is definitely harder than her first fight back in the first stage we did. The big problem with it is it's a large target, but a lot of its attacks can either be avoided by just staying at a distance or by sliding underneath it, or doing the good old belly flop through the hitbox. The bigger problem with a lot of these boss fights is actually the amount of health they have. That, and I believe if you die any time before the last boss in this rush, you're sent back to the beginning and have to refight them all. Gunstar is a game I do normally tackle the game on normal. The only reason I played it on hard was to showcase all of 7 Force. In the case, people playing along for some reason got a different Force phase than I did to see what to do with it visually. I've never been entirely certain why you don't just stop doing damage sometimes with Lightning Chaser. I want to say it might be because it's locked onto like the shoulder joint for some reason. That's not a hitbox. Or during that little guard phase, you just can't damage it, period, which is kind of weird that there's even a guard phase, period, for boss fights. Although I want to say there's a way you can also block attacks, but it's just either not useful enough or it can only be done with certain controllers or a certain button holding combination. It's not really super important, honestly, in my experience. It's not like, say, Kirby Superstar, some of the 3D or 2.5D Kirby games where the equivalent of blocking can make or break your true arena runs. And now they're lost in space. Good. And oh boy, we're coming up on Orange. Orange's refight is probably the hardest out of this set, if only because of his damage output and speed. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. This stage also very, in my eyes at least, exemplifies why it's good to maybe swap off the dual weapons every now and then. Just go back to the simple chase or the simple lightning for some faster speed and all that. Plus, I want to say the amount of damage that it takes for a boss to enter the little stun phase depends on either the weapon you're hitting them with or the time period within which you've done that damage. So, Orange has got 2 main attacks. He'll try to dash into you, and he can fire projectiles either directly up or directly down, depending on your positioning relative to him. Throwing him is still a very good example of damage, but getting close to him in this particular fight's not exactly recommended. My general strategy here is usually to just stay above him, hope he fires a projectile, and then use that stun to maybe get onto the same level as him, so he'll try to dash into me, and then I can just repeat from there. If he's ever above you, though, be careful, because if he throws down a projectile, that stuff explodes all over the floor, so you need to kind of get back up there with him, limiting your movement options quite a bit. This fight can be hard. I think I've died to this fight more than any other boss in this rush, barring maybe the last or second to last. And it's mostly because he's just so fast. Like, the black fight's not much of a problem. Oh man, the green fight. Oh boy, the green fight. We'll talk about that in about 4 minutes-ish. Yeah, here's like my favorite type of lock. Get him above me, stun lock him with Lightning Chaser, walk to the other side, he'll dash over, then I can just repeat because the dash takes enough time for the invincibility frames to wear off. If you get him in this, you're more than likely gonna be fine, but I think he likes to do this. This lock is easier to do, I believe, rather, when you're towards the latter third of his health or so. As I think he just gets more aggressive with dashing by the time you reach that point anyway. Let's see, you're doing roughly about 100 damage per lock. Yeah, there we go. Honestly, I think this stage would have been a lot worse if they didn't give you these little spaces between the boss fight. Which, there are some ways for you to regenerate some health between them, usually at least like 1 or 2 boxes that can drop some health. If this was like a Mega Man game where there was basically no time between them and maybe a single health pickup, this stage would be a lot worse. Black's refight is another machine fight, like he was during his own actual boss fight. But weirdly, it acts more as a platforming fight than an actual boss fight like the rest of the ones do. He's mostly going to stick up to the top and spawn some stuff from above you that you just kind of have to avoid. You can, I believe, shoot the centers of these laser beams to destroy them, but they'll get destroyed when they touch the platform anyway, so you can just try your best to avoid them. The rotating ones are probably the hardest to avoid, period, but this is honestly just kind of a cool section of the fight to me. Because he sticks up there more than long enough for you to get a good amount of damage in between his attack phases. I want to say he gets another attack towards the end of his health bar where he'll start firing lasers more directly at you. But by the time you reach that phase, he's pretty close to dead anyway. Yeah, here we are. He charges up a giant laser that you can avoid by standing at either extreme edge, and this is especially where he's vulnerable. And he does like 2 or 3 volleys in a row. Oh, the rotating laser. I'll be honest, I don't know how to avoid this. I want to say they want you to jump onto the platforms on either side of the main one. but I don't know how you're supposed to jump over him unless you can walk on top of him, and if that's the case, I just never tried to do that because I figured it would damage me. This is probably one of the most dangerous attacks, if only because it might knock you low on health for the next fight. Because we've taken care of all of Red or Gray's minions, depending on which version of the script you're reading, except for Green. And that means it's time for us to fight Green again, but we've already destroyed 7 Force. It's time for a one-on-one. Green is easily the most actively aggressive boss in the game because he plays like a Gunstar. He can run, he can shoot, he can belly flop, he can slide kick, he can block your attacks. He's a Gunstar. He is a player mirror match, essentially. Early on, he tends to stay more at a distance, but the further on you get into his health bar, the much more aggressive he can get. He even fires his own version of Chaser. That doesn't do a good job at chasing, but you can duck under at least the center-aimed ones. The thing you especially don't want to have happen, though, is like with Orange. You don't want to get right next to him unless you're actively trying to attack into him, because he can grab and throw you, and that hurts. This fight is rough. I'd say this is, on Expert Mode, probably the hardest boss fight in the game, because you just... Again, I don't think there's a checkpoint before this point in the stage. It's after this point there's any kind of checkpoint, so try your best to not die. I wouldn't recommend playing this game on Expert anyway, because that's the type of difficulty where it's just not really fun to me. Like, hard mode is a fair but fun challenge. Expert, not so much. I do want to say that the throw is easily his most damaging individual attack, though. Like, the individual stars only do like 2 or 3 damage. They're just betting on multiple hitting you in a row. And maybe that's their way of going, yeah, we know you're probably going to be low on resources at this point, so we'll give you a lot of attacks that just don't do a lot of damage. So if you can dodge one, you can dodge just that slight bit of health you still have left. There probably are better weapon choices for this particular fight than Lightning Chaser, but I'd rather be comfortable with what I'm used to, you know? Particularly, I think Fire and Force is good for this fight. Honestly, just double Force is decent enough from memory. Yeah, double Fire is probably fine as well. Really, Lightning and Chaser's biggest weakness is its individual damage values. Because while it assures you can keep a distance, especially with Free Shot, it's just not doing as much damage per individual second. But it's so good at just keeping you safe that that's my general priority. I want to say back when Scott and I attempted to do this together, I want to say he used, like, Force Fire together a lot. While this is a throw everything in the kitchen sink at you kind of deal, this level in general, really, I do think this is harder than the final boss. As while the final boss hits harder and has more HP, you have a checkpoint by then. The second to last boss fight, I find, usually is a harder fight in a surprising amount of games, especially RPGs. Like Final Fantasy X's second to last boss fight's harder than its final boss. Trails in the Sky second chapter is very much a case of that. Not so much Trails in the Sky first chapter. Trails third, maybe. Trails from Zero, maybe not so much in that case. I've been playing a lot of Trails, can you tell? Just gotta wait for that Azure release date, which is actually getting a lot closer than I think, probably, especially by the time this gets uploaded. But with Green done, it's time for Gray, Red, whatever your name is. Crap, the gems. Oh, crap, the gems! Well, that was easy. They took care of it for us. Where are you going? Well, they brought up gold and silver in the manual for a reason. Okay, so we have a checkpoint here, but it's time for the final boss against gold and silver. Gold and silver is the attacker, but it is not the target, because gold and silver himself is invincible. What we need to target here are the gems. The problem with that is you got a lot to watch out for in this fight, as Gold and Silver himself can attack you either by throwing or doing a couple of punches and projectile attacks here and there. But especially later on in the health bar, the gems themselves do attacks. Each one does a different one. And they all hurt a lot. The biggest bounty this fight has, though, is when you die, of course, you get to overmax your health at 240. But you can also avoid a lot of Gold and Silver's attacks themselves by either being at a distance, sliding through him when you're too close, or wall jumping off the walls. And there's a lot of times where Gold and Silver himself will just kind of stand there. I'm not sure if it's like the gems themselves charging up to attack, or if it's meant to be his AI just getting in a weird lock. Easily his most pain in the ass attack is when he just puts his hand out and 5 explosions come out of his fingers. Because he can kind of throw that out without much telegraphing. And if you're not paying attention, yeah, that'll just take a lot out of your health pretty quick. And then he starts teleporting, which is where this fight gets really annoying, because at that point you just need to always be on the move. And if you're in fixed shot, good luck with that. I'd say Gold and Silver alone is the reason why most players should play with freeze shot, because you really always want to be on the move here. And now the gems are starting to attack. Blue fires a laser down. I think they all fire some sort of laser downwards, it's just depending on what the actual element is. Like, I think fire, the red one might go from the side or something. This fight is hard, but because of the checkpoint being right there, you having probably more than enough health by the time you reach here, especially if you die here at least once, it's a very beatable final boss. That got one hell of a redesign in Superheroes, because my god, that game is very literally just this game again in a lot of ways, and that's even kind of a narrative point. But Gold and Silver in that game is huge. I might cover that game eventually, so we'll talk more about that then. But it's time to end it. That is the end. Honestly, quad 9 health goes by pretty quickly. So what now? A 1, a 2, a 3. Crunch! Oh, but you're still standing. Or you were. God, that's a weird way to leave. We've awakened the terrible destructor. Arrgh! I don't know what you expected. What are we going to do with no weapons? I'm sorry that I have brought trouble upon you all. Even though I was controlled by the Empire, I'm going to make amends for the things I have done to all of you. No, Green, come back! Oh, that's an ending. That's Gunstar Heroes! Its narrative is nothing special, of course, but what is special, honestly, is the game itself. While it is, overall, at the end of the day, a pretty standard run-and-gun, the visual creativity and the mechanics make for some very fun boss fights and levels that just fly by like nothing else, even if the game can easily kick your ass. It's one of my favorite Sega Genesis games. I'd say it's still probably overall my favorite Treasure game, which doesn't mean they peaked early with this being their first game as an individual studio. It's just, I like what this game does a lot on its own merits, compared to like Alien Soldier, because Alien Soldier does a lot of the same stuff, and it does it better, but it's also such a harder game. I love this game a lot. If you want to play it, it's on the Genesis. It's on a lot of the various Genesis collections over the years, like I think it's in the bad one on the PS3 that didn't let you link up Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's on Steam. I think it was on at least one of the virtual consoles, but by and large, those have all gone the way of the dodo nowadays in terms of adding fun, so good luck. It might be on the Genesis Online on Switch, I don't know. I don't have the expansion pack because I don't care for a lot of the things that those add. but I'd say it's worth your time if you can find a way to play it. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, have a great night, take care, and I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. See you guys then.